I like to maybe open us up with the Mi'kmaq Honor Song, and this song is was written by Elder George Paul, and I'll just read that translation piece. If you translate it from Mi'kmaq to English, is let us greatly respect being Ilnuk, and most people, my people, let us gather, let us greatly respect our indigenous roots. My people, let us help one another. Let us help one another according to the Creator's intention for putting us on this planet. And I'm going to drum the honor song, and I apologize ahead of time. I got a head cold, and so I'll try my best. And this is my drum. I made this drum about 6-7 years ago. It's a part of my bundle, and I share just a quick teaching about my bundle, and that I take that with me everywhere as I go. And I learned that teaching from Elder Josie Augustine, and she always shared that with me. She said, build your bundle, and it'll always grow and change as you grow older, and you're on your life journey. You'll give things away, and things will come to you, but you always take your bundle with you everywhere, and that's why it's so important. We open up with ceremony. And I have my drum in my bundle. And if you haven't heard the teachings of the drum, I'll just share a quick teaching in that the drum, it represents the heartbeat. So when we all come into this world, we all come from a mother. And while we're growing inside our mom's belly, the first thing we hear is our mother's heartbeat. And that's what the drum represents, the heartbeat. And in our history, when we drum, we drummed, for ceremony, but also sometimes we drum just to tell people we're coming in a good way. So when we traveled across Mi'kma'ki, we would let people know we're coming from a good place. So those are just some of the teachings I learned about the drum. And we'll open us up with the Mi'kmaq Honor Song. Get me dead on my edge, God till no 내가 마시오 예마위다네 Get me dead on my edge I'm with a back so deep 내가 마시오 예아보나 마도 됐네 예아보나 마도 됐네 Yesu peligano sikula sikamu hawi ahio weo haya weo haya weo haya weo haya Away, 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 Let me dead on my edge, don't tell you no. Think I must do, my we done. Get me dead on my edge, down with a back so deep. Take on my shoe, be up on a model be up on a model son, is so peligado, sikula sikamu. Hey-yo, well, hey, hi-ya, hey-yo, hey-yo, Just a mic check. I can't see anyone. Can you guys still hear me?
Thank you. That was amazing.
I'm really sick right now. So.
Thank you for that.
But you know what? Like I even when I've had a hard time even singing it because I'm a little sick right now. But you know, I felt the spirit when I was drumming, you know, and it helped guide me through the whole song. So thanks. So before we begin the session, you know, I'll open up with a quote, and this is from Dr. Marie Batiste. And if you haven't read this article before, I'll get you to write it down. And even during this whole session, you know, if you have a little notebook, you know, it'll be good to write down some of these pieces. And I would definitely recommend it. And she's a scholar, Mi'kmaq scholar, and she shares beautiful, beautiful teachings and messages. And so I'll share this from her article, Nourishing the Learning Spirit.
Jacob, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you know your slides are not moving. Your slide presentation, it's still on the very first one.
Oh, then. Karaniye.
Eh? Okay.
Oh, gee, I didn't even know. Thanks, Gene, I was going and kept cruising. I'll just leave it on like this, and I'll show you. We just had when we were sharing our land acknowledgement, and then we also had it on a slide there for the honor song. And thanks, Jane. So schools will validate the existing knowledge base of the students and provide an environment, experiences, and knowledge where students may work toward their gift and purpose in accordance with laws of Creator, passed down from collective stories, traditions, customs, and identities of Aboriginal peoples. And you'll see this symbol throughout the presentation. And what this symbol is Educator, which is translated to two-eyed seeing. And one of the founders here, Mi'kmaq of Two-Eyed Seeing, is Elder Albert Marshall and his wife, Medina Marshall. And they've worked with like Cheryl Bartlett and even with Jane and into sharing these teachings of two-eyed seeing. And that's what we're doing today is really we're and I'll talk a little more about that soon. But we're growing that Mi'kmaq perspective, that Mi'kmaq eye. The main challenge for Indigenous education in Canada today is to prepare students to walk in two worlds, their Indigenous nation and mainstream society. Indigenous education needs to help youth understand who they are, where they come from, and how to speak their ancestors' language. Elder Albert Marshall quoted that, and then we also have a quote from our Elder Jane. In addition, the youth need to understand cultural components, concepts, and ideas originating from ancestral teachings. So this is our goal for today. And I'm pumped. I was looking at O's. I was like, holy jumpings. There's a lot of people on the group. I was thinking we might only have 5. It's so cool. I'm really honored you're here. You're here for learning, and I'm very humbled. And today, our goal for today is growing knowledge and teachings, Mi'kmaq education. So we're growing that Mi'kmaq eye, into optimum, two-eyed seeing. And we're going to be doing that by sharing Mi'kmaq ways of being and knowing, and also teachings of Netukulimk. And then in our second session, or actually today for our first hour, we're going to do the Mi'kmaq ways of being and knowing. And after the break, if you're still here, we'll go into Netukulimk and also building cultural confidence. And that's just an opportunity to, if you have any questions, or comments, like, that me or Jane said, you'd like to know a little more about, to write them down. So even throughout this presentation, if something we say we weren't clear enough, or you want to know a little more, we're going to come back to that in a safe space, so you'll get a chance to ask those questions about who we are as a culture, as a community, and that's so important, especially where there's still so much fear, I think, from our non-native brothers and sisters, about what can you do, what shouldn't you do, and those kind of questions. And hopefully we'll have some good discussion where people will ask those questions and with no judgment, in a safe place. And I wanted to share this teaching too, before we jump into things. And me and Jane, we're talking about this about 2 months ago, right, Jane? And it's about giving the best that we have. And Jane, you want to share the teaching?
Sure. It was I was telling Jacob, actually last summer, one of the students in my class was talking about a teaching from the, I think it was from Treaty 7 territory in Alberta. And that's the Blackfoot Confederacy. And she was saying that how, that when you have guests or when you have somebody, you give them the very best you have. And I was telling Jacob, my grandmother taught me that. She always told me when somebody comes to the house, and I know my parents taught me by doing it. I saw it all the time when people would come to the house, and that would be always making sure that they had the best food you had, the best bed in the house. It wasn't usually a guest room. It was somebody's good bed, and just making them feel welcome and very at home, and just being very kind and always giving the very best. And an additional thing that my grandmother taught me is that when you a guest first shows up at your house, the first time that they visit, they never leave empty-handed. You always give a gift to them, and that's to teach that kindness and generosity and that spirit of giving. So it was something that was instilled in us as children, and I teach my children that too, my grandchildren.
Thanks, Jane. And I kind of want to like adapt that to even moving forward, me and my personal journey. Like whenever I do any kind of professional learning, and I'm always going to try to live by that about giving the best that you have, and showing people your heart, that emotion, that love, and it's so important that when you leave, from a place of learning, that you leave refreshed and you leave excited, and hope you've had those feelings today. So we'll try to give you the best that we have, right? And just wanted to add that little teaching in there. So we're going to jump into this activity, Mi'kmaq ways of being and knowing, and I'll share that last year we had the opportunity to do professional learning for grades P to 2 in most regions, and there's still some that because of COVID got held, and we're still going to plan on finishing that. And one of the activities we had was Mi'kmaq ways of being and knowing. And we're going to do that activity now here in the virtual space. And before I go too much further into it, I'll ask Jane if she could share the story as to how did it come about? Like, where did Mi'kmaq ways of being and knowing, the document that we're going to read, what was the story you could share with our guests?
Okay. Carola, who's now the executive director, and I were on a committee with Janet Porter, and we were doing, I don't know, I can't quite remember what we were working on. I think probably on the Undla series for P to 3. Anyway, or P to 2. Anyway, Carola and I kept talking about, if you're going to be teaching about Mi'kmaq, you have to have spirituality in there. You can't leave it out because it's such an important part of our culture. And that's where everything is based. Our language is spirit-based. Everything that we do is based on spiritual teachings. And Janet was telling us, she said, but it's the Department of Ed and we can't talk about religion. And I told her it's not really a religion because it doesn't matter what religion you belong to. It's or even if you don't have a religion, it's spirituality. It's about living your life the best possible way, and it really has very little to do with religion. And she said, she asked me, she said, can you write a one-pager about Mi'kmaq ways of being and knowing and what it means? Because she said many of us in non-native people don't understand that. So I said, okay. So I went home and when I got home, I smoked my pipe and I prayed and I asked for guidance. And this is what came out of that prayer, and it just came very quickly. But it's about understanding that that power greater than ourselves that I talk about is not always God. It can be. I call that power creator for me, but you don't have to. The thing is that power greater than ourselves can be something that we call love, and that power of love is very it can heal and it can help us. And when we send out love, that's a prayer. Prayer doesn't mean being on your knees or standing or praying for a long time. A prayer is as simple as when you get up in the morning. When I wake up, I think of my children that are away. I have children living in Truro, in Winnipeg, in Halifax, in Alberta, and in the Yukon. And I think of them, and I send good thoughts out to them. And that's a prayer. Just thinking of them and hoping they have the best day. So that's a prayer. And that's where this came from, is to have that understanding of spirituality, but not to confuse it with religion.
Thanks, Jane. And so what we're going to do is we're going to read the document, and I think Jane's going to be your narrator. But if you want to follow along on your own, I attached it in the chat box. I can't see it, but I attached the link, and I think you should be able to click on it. And if you want to read on your own, or if you want to just follow along, or also have it on the screen as well too. And while we're doing this, afterwards, we're going to give about 5 minutes or so just to kind of reflect and think. And then if you were to write down important pieces or that you highlighted or resonated with you. And when we do this activity in a large group, what we do is we have all the participants read it, and then we have them draw on a poster board, flip chart paper, with crayons and markers, and draw a representation of Mi'kmaq ways of being and knowing as a group, but without using any words. So folks would draw whatever they felt like this represented Mi'kmaq ways of being and knowing. And what's beautiful and unique about that whole activity and process is that out of all the times we've done it, there's never two identical pieces like of drawings, because when we read it, everyone takes things in their own perspective, right? And so that's pretty cool too. So what we'll do is afterwards, we'll take a few minutes, and if you wanted to draw on your own, I don't know how we could show it, but like you could even share about what you drew in your illustration, or just share what are your thoughts about and comments on Mi'kmaq ways of being and knowing. And then I wrote down 2 bullets there. How does Mi'kmaq ways of being and knowing fit with an inclusive education and learning for all students? And how could you have implemented this into your classroom or learning environment? So after you learn what you learn, how do you implement it? Sorry.
Going it up. Can I interrupt?
Yeah, please.
Wadigascook, everyone. It's Janet Porter. I work with Jacob and Jane in Mi'kmaq Services. I just recopied the link to your own document of Mi'kmaq ways of being and knowing at the bottom of the chat.
Thanks, Janet. So I'm going to flip over to this page. This is what you would have, and Jane's going to read it and write down any notes or drawings as you go along, and then we'll take a few minutes and we'll discuss it.
Okay.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll put myself on mute for a second. 1 second.
Okay. Mi'kmaq ways of being and knowing. Within the framework of Mi'kmaq culture, ideals, and ethics, and in combination with a nurturing environment, every student will be provided with a chance for intellectual, spiritual, emotional, and physical growth and development. As Mi'kmaq, we recognize that we are all connected and entwined together by the supportive strands of relationships with one another and with the earth. And we should always be inspired to place emphasis on the well-being of the collective. All people are born with individual gifts and strengths that must be, there's something missing there. Anyway, that must be acknowledged, valued, and cultivated so they reach their full potential as responsible and productive human beings with love and compassion for the sacredness of life. In addition, we understand that love and the ancestors are our source of strength and inspiration. Their guidance coming from many sources, including prayers, meditation, dreams, and in the words and deeds of others. Therefore, the emphasis of Mi'kmaq education needs to focus on the four aspects of being: the mind, heart, spirit, and body, with the understanding that young people are gifts to humanity, sacred beings that are to be honored and treated with love, respect, and dignity. Many misconceptions are deeply ingrained in colonial ideas and imperialistic ideologies that have caused devastation and eradication of Indigenous knowledge. The acceptance and establishment of Mi'kmaq ways of being and knowing are essential to the education of all our children, critical to their survival, and pertinent to Mi'kmaq identity. As educators, we need to adopt a holistic approach to Mi'kmaq education. To do anything less becomes a disservice to our students and to the significance of what we want to convey. Compartmentalizing those aspects of a human being, heart, mind, spirit, and body, and teaching about them in only a cognitive understanding can take away from the traditional and spiritual teachings. And once again, we are approaching the education of our students from a Western paradigm on who the Mi'kmaq are. Mi'kmaq education has traditionally operated in a holistic model of learning. Mi'kmaq core values, principles, and philosophy of life tend to center around our understanding of spirituality and to the connectedness of all creation. Knowledge was disclosed and shared with the specific purpose of teaching the individual to live in harmony with Mother Earth and how to behave as a sacred being living among other sacred beings. All my relations.
Well, hey, Jane. So we'll take about 5 minutes, and if you have any notes or comments, we'll come back and we'll share them, and I'll just take that 5 minutes for both pages, so I'll put it on this one for now. If anyone would like to share, we're just going to open it up, and at 2 o'clock we'll have that break. So it'd be great to hear some different voices, and I'll just leave it open. What would you like to share? Thoughts, comments, things that resonated with you?
One of the things that I think is most powerful for me is the recognition of the importance of spirituality, that center of meaning. And I really am very moved by the way that Elder Jane referred to that as a center of love.
I just found it amazing, having attended the African Nova Scotia Education Framework session this morning, how many things there are very much in common. They talked about the mind and the body and the spirit as well, and the importance of spirituality. So if we're seeing this in two places, it means that we really need to remember the whole child. We're not just teaching like two-dimensional paper copies in front of us like they have in the sports stadiums now. We're teaching the whole child. So it comes back to relationships, and the importance of our relationship to the earth is another piece that it really resonates with me, and something I really think is important. And to put that all together, it's just really important.
I was at that session this morning too, Anne, and I as well was thinking the same, how much similarity there is in this valuing of the whole child and their spirits, and that loving them is really what it's all about.
Hi, I was just reading some of the comments, and I like this one by Carol Ellis, and she says, "I am touched by the explicit notion of students as sacred beings, which makes being a teacher a sacred responsibility." I really like that comment. Thank you, Carol.
So Jane, how about you, Jane? Would you like to share any thoughts? I mean, you wrote it. Would you like to share any thoughts as to for our students, why Mi'kmaq ways of being and knowing are important.
I think they're important because, as was it somebody said a while ago, that they're doing the same thing with African Nova Scotians, and it's that same thinking, that same worldview, I think. And the reason I think it's important, it's because it's inclusive. It's a oh my gosh, how would I say it? It's a common view among Indigenous people of the world, whether they come from New Zealand, Australia, the oh my God, the South Pacific, you know, South America, North America, the West Indies, Africa. These are common threads among Indigenous people of the world. And I think it's important that that the rest of the world learn these, because they are the same truths that I think are in the I would assume they're in the Torah and in the Bible and in the Quran and other world religions. It's about loving and caring and remembering how each person is a gift and is a gift to the world and has a place and has a duty and has a job. Like in our spirituality and in our belief system, we are taught that before we came to the earth, that we are spiritual beings, and that we were spirit long before we came to the earth. We will continue to exist as a spirit long after the body is gone. And sometimes we come back. That spirit will come back to the earth. But I think it's important that what I was saying is before we come to the earth, what we're taught in our spirituality is that we have, we know that we have a job and a duty, and our job on the earth is to fulfill what we were meant to do, is to fulfill that promise we made before coming to the earth. And it's also to leave the earth or leave the world in a much better place than when you arrived, that you have made a big difference, that you leave some kind of legacy. And it has nothing to do with material things, but it has to do with your heart and your spirit and how you treated people and how you treated the earth and how you treated animals and how you behaved as a human being, and were you respectful? Because our elders tell us, when you go back into the spirit world, the first question that's going to be asked of you, there are two questions. One, who are you? Second, what did you do for humankind? And that those are, I think, important things to think about when we're living, because even material things, and I'm not saying I don't like material things, I do, but they can't be my ultimate goal in life, because I can't take them with me anywhere. The things that are important, the things that are real, the things that will continue long after I'm gone are, how did I treat my fellow humans? What did I do to make this place a better place because I was here? I guess that's all I have to say for now, Jacob.
Thanks, Jay. And it reminds me, when I was listening to you share, like, I'm always trying to teach my daughter Scarlett. She's 5, and little things, little teachings about, like, for example, even with bugs. And we have an ant problem right now in our kitchen. And Scarlett likes to try to kill the bugs or the ants. And I try to teach her, that they're alive. They have a family. They have a spirit, right? And even with spiders, if she sees a spider, and just trying to teach her those little teachings. I'll pick up the spider or the paper and I'll put it outside. And I'm always trying to do that. It's like a teaching of him sit nogma, all my relations, that everything has a spirit. So in our culture, it's okay if we went up to a tree and gave the tree a hug and said, I love you. You know what I mean? There's some other folks might think it's crazy or weird, but that tree's alive, and to honor that tree's spirit. And I'll share a quick teaching. We're at one of our sessions, and the knowledge keeper, Gary Jacobs, it was just a simple teaching, but it was about, like, how water's alive. And there are studies that show, scientific studies show that water is alive. And he said, in the morning, how often do you give thanks to that water? When you have a shower in the morning, we take it for granted. We use water for everything we do, and how often do you do that? Just to give it thanks for cleaning you, right? And as I was preparing for this, I'm always reminded of that teaching. I always come back to it. Like this morning, I was in the shower, and I was telling someone, water, thank you. You know what I mean? Because it's life. And I think that's so important for our children, and if you have young students or even older students, that they all have that strength and that gift. They're important. They bring something to your class, and if you look at them with love. And I'll share another quick teaching how you reflect back on your childhood and you think about those teachers who impacted you and made an impression, the ones that you always remember. Those are the ones who showed you that love, that cared for you. I don't remember the teachers who were strict or who had their routines in order. Maybe I remember that was my teacher. I don't remember them that they were my favorite teacher. And it goes back to that relationship piece, right? One activity I did before, I never did it in a while, but especially if you're in the classroom, what I do is I get a big ball of yarn, and then I hold the piece of yarn, and then you pass it to someone across the circle, and then you it's about to show how interconnected you are as a team, as a class, but also what I do is I tell students to share what do they think their strengths are, and or their gifts that they're given, something that they're really good at. And even students as young as 5 or 8 or whoever it may be, they all have an idea what they're good at. And then I'll give examples, maybe you're good at sports, you're good at hockey or basketball, maybe you're a good friend, maybe a good reader, a good writer. And what do you think are your gifts and strengths? And then we'll go around in the circle and then tell them, make sure you hold on to it, the string when you throw, and then you unravel it a bit and throw it across the circle. And then when everyone had an opportunity to share what their gifts and strengths were, and I share that teaching about how it's so important that we acknowledge people for their strengths and gifts. So if somebody is a fast runner, you should tell them, hey, you're really a good fast runner, because it's so important you hear those gifts from those people. You cherish them, you love them, right? And it's because in our society, I don't know, our society today is getting worse in the sense that we don't do that. Like you hear the saying, you do 99% things right, and the one thing you do wrong, you know, that's where people jump on it, right? And you see it all through social media. So that's why it's so important that within your class community or your work community, if you see someone who has a really good strength, and you know, to tell them that, you know, you're a really good listener, you're a good friend, you know, you have a good heart, you know, whatever it is you think you see in them, and then for them to know that too, you know. So it's just one of those activities. And then it shows like a web, and you just talk about how we're all connected, and when we share each other's strengths, we're a community, you know, and we help each other in that sense too, right? So I just wanted to share that activity, I guess, for us coming back. And I'm going to check the chat right quick. I was reading over the comments too, and like Jane mentioned, they're beautiful comments and questions, and that's really awesome. You know, I love reading them over the break there.
That activity you were talking about too, Jacob, we've used it, we call it a living dream catcher. And as you're saying, they're talking about their strengths and also their dreams, what they hope to be. And we call it a living dream catcher. And then after we gather it up, and we can we either will put it into a sacred fire, or we just kind of put it away and just, you know, maybe at the end of the year bury it, or you know.
That's so cool. So welcome back, everyone. We're gonna jump right into it. Hope everyone had a good break. And before I jump into, though, I want to share, just like even this artwork here, this is by Loretta Gould. And Loretta is an artist from Wagelgama. And if you Google her, you might see some of her artwork even throughout Halifax now, I believe. There's somewhere, I forget, she has there's a big wall canvas painted somewhere she worked on. But her artwork is so beautiful. And just want to give a shout out to Loretta. And so thank you for joining back. And if there's any new folks, we'll just do a quick recap. You know, in our first part of the session, we talked about we had ceremony, and we talked about Mi'kmaq ways of being and knowing. And now we're going to go into teachings of Netukulimk, and we'll share some stories and teachings about that. And but before we begin, I want to bring back to that symbol of Educator, which is two-eyed seeing. And I'll read that quote above from Albert. Learn to see with both eyes as nature intended. So the learnings that you had today so far, and if you wrote down some comments, you know, some pieces that we were sharing, you're starting to grow that Mi'kmaq eye. You know, you're building it. And if you look at historically our education for our Mi'kmaq students, Indigenous students, we didn't have that growing up. We didn't have that Mi'kmaq eye in our education system. And if anything, our culture and our knowledge from our ancestors, from our elders and our community was shamed in a way, you know, and it was so colonized into, you know, how we have our education system now. And we're starting to see those changes where, you know, we are seeing more culturally relevant pedagogy embedded into the curriculum. But it's taken time, you know, and for the longest part, though, for a Mi'kmaq student, you know, even me growing up, I didn't see myself reflected into our books, maybe in social studies class, and even then, we were hunters and gatherers, right? So it's taken time, but it's so important that we continue to grow that Mi'kmaq eye, grow that knowledge, you know, because we've had that knowledge for, you know, very, very long time, you know. So Jane, did you want to add any more before we go into our next piece?
I had my mic off. This graphic, when you look at this graphic, you'll see that the puzzle does not quite fit together. It's a little off. And that's to illustrate that both, that there is strength in both eyes, and they're not to be combined. but to work side by side, that you can look at something from a Western point of view, and you can look at something from an Indigenous point of view, or, you know, from the Western and from African Nova Scotian, or whatever the other culture is, that you can see, you can have strengths in both. And they don't need to be, they're actually not meant to be combined, but to work side by side. That's why that puzzle doesn't quite fit the way a puzzle would.
Thanks, Jane. So we're going to continue. You know, we're on this journey together. And our next piece is, we're going to be talking about the teaching of Netukulimk. And this is Loretta Gould's work. And I think this picture is so beautiful, and it just shows you that interconnectedness, you know, of like even the moose, and it's connected to Mother Earth, and even the people inside. And I feel like it's, when I look at that, I just think of respect, you know, that they're all connected. I see love. You know, I think if all of us were to share, we'd have our own kind of meanings behind that picture. And when we go into these teachings of Netukulimk, you'll see that that picture really fits well. So, Jane, I was wondering if you can give us a little Mi'kmaq lesson on the word and how we say it, and yeah.
It's right there. It says Netukulimk. And in our language, although we use that Roman orthography, our language, we don't have silent letters usually. We don't have, every letter has a sound, and every sound has a letter. There are 13 letters in our alphabet, and some of the letters are sounded a little differently. Like a T does not necessarily sound like a T. It can sound almost like a, sometimes it sounds like a T, sometimes it sounds like a D, and other times it sounds like a combination. The K is either a G or a K sound, and sometimes it's almost a combination. It's not quite a G and not quite a K. And same with, what's the other one? The P. The P sometimes sounds like a B, or a lot of times sounds like a B. So they're a little bit, they're a little bit different. You, like in English, you would probably pronounce that Netukulimk, but it's in our language, it's a D and a G, Netukulimk.
Thanks, Jane.
Okay.
And I'm going to just read this. This is like a definition of Netukulimk, and then we'll talk.
And it's a verb-based language. This is a verb, Netukulimk. Okay.
You want to maybe add a little more to that, Jane? Like how our language is verb-based, and I think that's such a good teaching.
Yeah, it is a verb-based language. Almost everything that we, it has a lot to do with even colors. When we say colors, that doesn't exist in English, but I did find out the same thing exists in French. Have the same thing. Like you can, when we say megoasit, we're actually saying that it's in the process of turning red, or megwik. And I was talking to one of my students one time, and she was saying that the French have that. And then we were talking, she said, I never realized English doesn't have that. Like turning the becoming the color of green, or that we have that too. That so we, yeah, colors can be verbs as well as adjectives.
I think it's important to mention too that even within home communities, families have like different dialects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they do.
Some families would say things maybe different, and that's the beautiful thing about the Mi'kmaq language. And I was translating that video we're working on not too long ago, and I was given that comment that it could mean this, like the words can mean so many different things.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
But also, there's people like in like Restigouche, New Brunswick. They speak a little differently, but we understand each other. It's, I guess, same as the English in England and the English in southern United States. They're both English, but they're both a little different. And,
That's right.
yeah.
Okay, so Netukulimk is an essential concept for Mi'kmaq people because it embeds understanding as to how a person should live their life on Earth, where spirit guides the heart, mind, and actions. Netukulimk governs the physical, emotional, cognitional, social, and spiritual relationships a person has with everything, including the physical features of the land, the rhythm and cycles and patterns of Wutsikkamu, which is Mother Earth, and all her living beings and non-living things. These key understandings and their interconnectedness are emphasized in the teachings of Lillian Marshall as seen in the poster Emi Bunkeg Mi'kma'ki. So this is like the eco calendar. If we had a bigger picture, we could see just kind of like that whole interconnectedness of the seasons of the different pieces in that photo. So Netukulimk is now in the curriculum. So if you teach junior high, I believe it's like even in the pilot curriculum, grades 7, 8, and 9, or 7 and 8, for sure. I'm not sure. I think even high school would have it too. So it's something that teachers are learning and will learn, when they're teaching that subject. And I'll maybe open it up. And for me, when I think of Netukulimk, I think of like, so my family is like a generation, right? So like my grandmother, my mom, me, my child, that's a generation. And when I think of Netukulimk, I think about, and the teachings that were given to me were that it's thinking about our 7 generations before us, are from our elders and ancestors, and thinking about those 7 generations ahead of us, and keeping in line with like sustainability. So like what Jane was sharing, like what are we doing to show that respect and love for nature, for Mother Earth, and what are we doing to protect Mother Earth for our next future generations? And I remember a friend of mine, Rebecca Thomas, she's the poet. She learned, her father, I think, told her, like our elders, when they would pick medicines, they wouldn't pick the first, if there's a group of medicine, they wouldn't pick the very first plant. They would pick maybe the 3rd plant and pick on. So they're always making sure that medicine is left behind for future generations, so it's able to grow again. The people, because even with our people, we always come back to, like even for example, in the summer here with sweetgrass, we wouldn't uproot the whole sweetgrass. We'd always make sure that we, our families would go to those places, and that'd be our kind of like our seasonal picking, But we always go back to that place because we know the sweetgrass is there. So for me, I think that's like I think just for me, when I first think of Netukulimk is about that, and but it's embedded in the teaching of Imsit Nogma, which is all my relations, and that's understanding that everything around us has a spirit, and it shares that in the first paragraph there, and knowing that we are not above every other being. You know, I think as humans, that happens so much. We put ourselves above animals, above plants and animals, but really we should be par. You know, we shouldn't put ourselves above animals or above, you know. And traditionally, when we hunted, you know, and it's still today too, like if we were to hunt a moose, you always give thanks to that moose for giving its life, that four-legged, you know, and you would pray and give thanks to that moose. Thank you for providing for my family. And we would make sure we used everything on that animal. Nothing was put to waste, and then if so, we would even share with our neighbors, our relatives, and we wouldn't abuse that, you know. And that, I think that's such an important teaching, you know. And even with, like, for example, like we would use everything, even for the tools. But the things that we wouldn't use, we would put it away, like even hang from a tree, so that the critters and animals wouldn't pick at that moose, right? So it's honoring that spirit, and I think that's what I was trying to get at earlier with my daughter Scarlett. If she sees a spider, I try to tell her, like, that's my friend. Like, don't step on my friend, you know. And he's alive or she's alive and has a family, you know. And so I think for me, that's what I think of Netukulimk. Those are some of the things that come to my mind, right?
With me, sorry, go ahead. Somebody was going to say something, and I interrupted them. With me, when I think of Netukulimk, one of the things that always comes to mind is a quote that is attributed to Chief Seattle. And it says, "We did not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We are borrowing it from our children." And I think, like Carol says here, yeah, it's about the next 7 generations. It's about the 7 generations back who thought about us, and the next 7 generations that we are responsible for, and that we need to think about. And like Jacob was saying, we don't always pick everything. Like just recently, Janet and I were doing a piece on fiddleheads, and when you pick fiddleheads, they usually grow in little clusters of 5 to 6, 7. You don't pick all from that whole cluster. You might pick 3 or 4, and you leave the rest. And things like when we make our game of Walkdes, which is the bowl is done from a hardwood burl that grows on a tree. So when our people would do that, what they would do is they would take a sapling and they tie a knot in the sapling. So as the sapling would grow, that burl would grow, and there'd be a burl for somebody down the road, like 7 generations time. They'll have that, so it wasn't completely depleted. And it's about conservation, it's about honoring, it's about sustainability, and it's the whole thing. It's encompassing everything. It's not just replanting trees, because when you take that tree, you're not just taking the tree, you're affecting what's underneath the tree, you're affecting the roots, you're affecting the insects that live in there, you're affecting the animals that use the tree, the birds that fly in that make their nests. So it's everything. It's not just a tree by itself. There's so much more. Like the the forest floor. You're disrupting that. So it's a lot more to it, and it's about trying to keep the earth as intact as we found it.
Jane, I was wondering if you could share that teaching. I just wrote some notes down this morning when I was getting things ready and stuff, and I love that teaching you share about traditionally the hierarchy and how that looked.
Hierarchy. It's kind of throwing me off.
With our leaders and where they position themselves, like in the community.
Oh, okay. What I was saying was most of the I think probably all Western society tends to look at society as a hierarchy. It's like a pyramid. The people are at the bottom. And like even today in Canada, you have the people at the bottom. You have your maybe your MPs, and you have the Senate, and you have the Prime Minister at the top and a Governor General. So it forms this pyramid. Whereas traditionally in our society, what we had was an inverted pyramid. It was the people that were at the top. And then you had your district chiefs, you had your local chiefs, you had your district chiefs. Actually, they were like council. And you had the clan mothers, and then you had, and then that's when you had the chief, and the chief was the spokesman for everyone, but it was all done with consensus. It was never about majority rule. It was always done with consensus. And it was the people who had, who made the decisions about what was to come from the people and what they needed and what they wanted. And when you hear the American, when they talk about government for the people, by the people, that's actually an Indigenous idea. And that government that the United States is based on Indigenous governments. Except that our Congress were the clan mothers, the women. And so it was about, it was always about the people who made the final choices. And then they'd come to this consensus, and then the decisions were made. It was never the chief or that ruling body that made the final decisions. It had to come from the people first. And it was, it wasn't just one person. It was a group who spoke on behalf of everybody else, who they got their direction from everybody else, rather. Okay?
Thanks, Jane. So we're going to watch a little short video, and you can find this video on YouTube. And the voices of the characters are actually Jane and her daughter, Paulina. And Paulina is the baby little fish, and Jane is the grandmother fish. Or big fish.
The old fish.
Yeah. And so you can find this video on YouTube, and even if you just search Netukulimk, and I think there's actually like lesson plans that come with it too for inquiry. And so even if you search it, you would find even lesson plans on that as well too. But I feel like it's such a beautiful video, and we've been sharing it a lot. So if you haven't seen it yet, it's I think it's really awesome. It shows on Netukulimk. So I'm going to try sharing it on here. We practiced last night in the work, so let's see how it goes now.
One day, my grandmother fish, Nugami, called for me.
Where's little fish? Where'd you go? there you are, Gwiz. I have been waiting for you.
Nogami, will I grow to be as big and strong as you?
Well, in the beginning of time, the Great Spirit, Isul, created all things in nature equally. The sun creates life and gives us our shadows. The shadows reflect the spirits of our ancestors. Umsid Nogama.
Nogami, what does this mean?
It means we are all related. The people of this land realized that we were all of spirit, placed here on Mother Earth to help each other. Glooskap called upon us fish, Nemejik, to come to shore and give up our lives. He only took what was needed and gave thanks for our existence. We call that Netukulimk.
Then what happened, Nogami?
For thousands of years, we continued to rely on our brothers and sisters of the woods and waters. The Mi'kmaq called us Beju, the cod. They used small boats called canoes made of birch bark and small nets to catch us. They used us for food and to trade with others for things they did not have. They dried us in the sun and used salt from the sea to preserve us. The Ono, the people, were grateful for the help and honored us. Remember Netukulimk? They too only took what they needed. We lived in harmony with the people, the land, and all things. We filled the sea and we grew large and fat. Your great-great-great-grandfather was the size of a dolphin or a muchpetch.
But why have I never seen a cod so large?
Well, about 500 years ago, people from faraway lands arrived. They came for us, amazed that they could not row through the waters because of our crowds. They came with more and bigger boats and more and bigger nets. And they took us away without honor, without thanks. They caught too many of us. They took us before we could grow big and fat. They took us before we could have babies. They destroyed our homes. They did not learn how to live in harmony. They did not understand Netukulimk.
What is to come of us now?
That story is still to be told, Liz. For you to live strong, for you and your children to grow as large as your great-great-great-grandfather, Niskamich. For us to refill the sea, for that
we must find a way once again to live in harmony with our brothers and sisters. Umsit Nogama, all my relations.
Nagespia Duksitkik. And that is the end of the story.
So before we move on, does anyone have any questions on the mic for questions or comments about teachings of Netukulimk?
I have something to share, Jacob. One of the things that I had learned from elders a long time ago was the order of creation. And I don't know if any of you have heard this before, but one of the things this elder told me, she said that when you look at creation stories, and it doesn't matter which creation story it is, it can be ours, it can be the Haudenosaunee creation story, maybe from South America, maybe from Africa. It could be anything. It could be Adam and Eve from the Bible. But she said the one thing that each creation story has, and the thing that's a common theme among all those creation stories, is that the human being is the last one to be made. That it needs to, and there's a reason why. She said the reason is that we have to learn a little bit more about humility. We are not the masters. We are not the ones that control everything, that control nature, that control the animals. We don't have that dominion over them that we think. Because when you look at creation, the land was created, the light and darkness were created, the water and land were separated, and then the plants came, and then the animals came, and the very last thing to arrive on the earth are the human beings. And she said, that we need to remember that, yes, Netukulimk, it's important to use that concept and to always think about it, because according to the order of creation, we have the plants and animals don't need us. They existed long before we came to the earth, and if we end up destroying ourselves, they will continue to exist. They don't need us in any way. But we need them. We need water. We need air. We need the animals. We need plants to survive. We are dependent on them. They are not dependent upon us at all. And that we need to see them as equals and as brothers and sisters, rather than being above them and thinking that we are, I guess, maybe worth more than they are. But it's about that equity and realizing they are important. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Jane. I think even it reminds me of in the early stages of the COVID journey back in March and April, and how folks were told to stay home, and how we've seen that for our Mother Earth, how the waters were clearing, and there's pictures from above showing all the different waters and stuff out there. So it seems like our Mother Earth had a little bit of a break, right, from the pollution and from all those things that are happening around the world. And that was nice to see, when we were asked to stay home, kind of thing, right? Okay, so we have about 25 minutes in our presentation, and we again back to the symbol here of Educator. We're building that knowledge, and we're going to continue. And for the last bit here, we just like to open it up. And so if anyone wrote down any comments or questions, I'll leave this page so you won't see this in the shared while I'm sharing, because I kind of want to see the comments that are coming up in the chat box. So you can write in the chat box or you can voice it. But if there's any questions, you'd like to know a little more about the Mi'kmaq culture, whether it's a history question, whether it's about our communities, I think it's a really great opportunity to share, especially when we have Jane, who's just so has so much wisdom and knowledge, and she shares it in such a loving way. And I think we have an awesome opportunity to ask any kind of question. And there's no wrong question, and that's a part of life. We're learning, right? And so I think it'd be a good opportunity to talk about those pieces. What do you want to learn more about? What are you not sure of? And like I mentioned, many teachers still have that fear. When we talk about treat education, many teachers are like, I don't know, I don't want to teach this in my class because I haven't had time to learn it, right? And a fair statement, so what do you like to learn? And then we'll open it up, and I'll look at any questions on the side, and we'll take it from there.
I have a quick question. Well, maybe it's not quick. I don't know. I just going back to your teachings with the yarn. I was thinking that in terms of leading some of these teachings, considering that I'm non-Indigenous, if I can't have an elder with me to guide me through some of these things, am I encouraged to do some of these things myself? Obviously, you would indicate who you're learning things from and kind of a bit of the background, but I'm just curious. I'm just curious kind of what you should be doing as a non-Indigenous teacher in terms of those kind of teachings. And
Thanks, Kelly. Go, Jane.
I was just saying that for that particular exercise, I really don't see an issue with it. I think you know what's in your heart, and you know what's right, and you know what we want to be as human beings. And I think it's a good thing if you do it and you lead it. Especially, like you said, if you can't get an elder in there, that's quite all right, because as long as you're teaching from your heart and your spirit, when you depend on your heart and your spirit, very seldom will you go wrong. You offer a little prayer, tobacco, whatever, and just, in your own heart what's right. We have that inner voice that I think we tend not to listen to, that tells us, yeah, this is the right thing to do, this is good, and it makes me feel good, and it makes others feel good.
Thanks, Kelly. We have another question, Jane, from Natalie. How can we be sensitive to intergenerational trauma around the topics like infectious diseases when discussing outbreaks like COVID? So either making connections, but how they're part of that history, right?
I don't quite get the question. What is it that she's asking?
You want to elaborate, Natalie?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm just thinking about, historically, with infectious disease, obviously there is some quite a bit of history there with Indigenous communities. And I just wanted to know if there was anything that we should consider when talking about outbreaks, and if there is intergenerational trauma there, how to be more sensitive to that.
I'm not really sure, but if you're asking about historically, our populations were almost decimated because of diseases, the flu, smallpox, tuberculosis, you name it. Because our people on this side of the world, we didn't have immunity to those diseases because they never existed here. So we never built an immunity against those diseases. And so when they came, they really took out a lot of the population. And things like when you talk about history, for instance, you talk about Jamestown in Virginia, how they came in there and they built these towns. And it happened a lot in the Americas, is that the Europeans came and they built these towns. They actually didn't build them. What they did was they took over towns that were ghost towns. They were villages that the Indigenous people had built, that had lived in, where they had cultivated the soil, where they had planted, and they just moved in because the diseases had destroyed them. As far as I don't know how else to talk about other than the infectious diseases, is that we follow the rules, I guess, as they say, keep away from others, and that we don't want to hurt anybody else, and we don't want to get hurt. And even if we don't have the symptoms, sometimes we can carry those to our grandparents or to people who are sick. Like I have a daughter, the one that was voiced this video, she has cystic fibrosis. So I have to be really careful around her, that we don't have any colds or lung infections when we're with her. And I haven't seen her since March with this COVID-19 because she's in self-isolation. And I don't think that answered your question. Because I'm not really sure what you're looking for.
I think that's just so important, though. It is a really important piece, Natalie, with teaching that intergenerational trauma, that shared history. Our history books lack a lot of that history of what was happening in Canada and North America to Indigenous people throughout time. And it's so important that if you haven't had the opportunity yet to learn about that shared history, to take that personal journey and hear, what has happened, with all the different pieces like residential school and centralization and being segregated into reserves and all those pieces. The Indian Act is one of the most, if anything, is the most racist document ever created. It still governs us by the government. So I think that it's so important that, and that's something that we would probably do on another session too, is to dig into those effects of colonization. But if you haven't had those, learned about those learnings, it's important that you take the time to hear our shared history. I'm going to go to Brian. He asked a question. I'm interested to know and understand more about how Indigenous communities. Do you want to take that one, Jane?
You cut off. I didn't hear what you said.
That's okay. Brian asked if how do he's wondering, how do Indigenous communities view disability?
How do they view disability? I don't know if they really even see it like it. I'll tell you how they see Alzheimer's, and which was always interesting when I was young, when sometimes when our elders would get Alzheimer's, and our people always viewed it as that the people who had Alzheimer's have lived a long life and now have been able to return to their second childhood. And that's how that Alzheimer's was seen, was that they were able to go back to their childhood, just like when they were young. That behavior and the way they speak and the way they act is that they've earned, I guess, that second childhood. It was never seen as a deficit. The performing pieces, I'm trying to see this Adele music teacher and struggle with my place when it comes to sharing, teaching, performing pieces, including music, have been culturally. Oh my God, you know what? I love that question. I'm going to tell you why. there is, if you have not seen this movie, please watch it. There is a really good movie that's been out for a couple of years, and the title is Rumble, Indians Who Rock the World. And it's about the roots of jazz, blues, rock music, and the influence that Indigenous music and Indigenous musicians had on music today, and on those genres of music. I think it's one of the best documentaries I have ever seen. Yeah, Indians Who Rock the World. Thank you, Sister Modal. I like that, Sister Modal. There's an elder that I turn to all the time called Grandfather Google. But yeah, I love that movie. And if you have a chance to look at that, please watch it, because it shows you a lot of the roots of that music and how it comes from Indigenous people. Like that Power Chord by Pete Townsend from The Who. It originated with an Indigenous guitarist by the name of Link Ray. So yeah, I'd advise you to watch that movie. It's a really good movie.
I'll just jump in there too, Adele. There's even like was it Nova Scotia Symphony? Yeah, they did a piece with Gullo's her song
Gentle Warrior.
Gentle Warrior, yes. And they came down to Wescazone and they performed. And I think that, as long as it's done in a meaningful and a good way, and then if you're not sure, even with any question, it's so important that you reach out to people. Like if you know of an elder, community member, even someone from your region, like a Mi'kmaq education coordinator. There's some even on the call here. I seen Wyatt White and Holly Muse. Like if you reach out to them and ask them, is this right? Because a teaching that my boss shares a lot, Carola, is she always shares from Albert. Is it authentic? Is it sacred? And is it, what's the other one, Jane? Accurate.
Sacred, authentic, and accurate, yeah.
Yeah, it's accurate. So I always think about those three. Is it authentic? Is it sacred? Is it accurate? And be mindful that, if you are, so even like a message to George Paul, and if you send him an email or a Facebook or something and say, this is what we created, get that permission, what do you think about it? Can we perform this? And he's awesome. He's wonderful. Like he'd be so honored, I think, if you showed him a version of violins with him being an honor song, so. There's another question here. Carol L. Ellsbro, can you point us toward resources that we can use to build our understanding of the effects of colonization?
Do you know what? I'm going to tell you this. There's a wonderful book I use in my course. I teach a course at St. FX on Indigenous pedagogy. And there's a book I just really love, and I use it. And I try to encourage the teachers in that course to teach Indigenous knowledge from not from a deficit perspective, but because there's a book, it's a wonderful book by a man named Jack M. Weatherford, Weatherford. And it's a book called Indian Givers, how the natives of North America changed the world. And it's a wonderful book, and it shows you how that we're still benefiting from those gifts of the Indigenous people from 500 years ago, from 600 years ago, in pharmaceuticals, in education, in science, in in almost everything, in governance, in architecture, and how much the Indigenous people have given to the world, but have never been recognized for that knowledge and that contribution. So if you can read that book, please do, because it has a lot of wonderful things in there that you can teach the kids, even things like food. That 75% of the food you find in a grocery stores comes from the Americas. You know, it's amazing that when you see all the stuff that Indigenous people have given to the world. But I hope you take a look, and that's just one book that I really enjoy, and I encourage people to read is that book.
And there's another resource too. It's a new book. It's called 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act. And that's something I feel like is another excellent resource.
Yeah, Pemmican actually saved the lives of settlers in Western Canada. Actually, Indigenous people saved the lives of many settlers in Canada and in the United States, and even in Europe. By introducing food, when Europe was starving, Indigenous people showed the explorers or the settlers the foods that they were eating. And so it helped heal the populations in Europe and help them grow because of this food, because they were starving to death in Europe. So there's a lot of contributions. I can't even think of them all, even things like that people don't realize, like cocoa and chocolate, you know, rubber. There's just so much that Indigenous people have given, and in the science, and in thoughts, in philosophy, in thinking independently. When you talk about socialism, when you talk about democracy, they all started here in the Americas. Oh, Indigenous views on disability. Whoops, sorry. But I don't ever remember anything people being treating disabled people differently, or people with disabilities. I don't ever remember people being pointed out. Like in my childhood, I remember, like when I was young, and there was a lady, one of my friends had an aunt who dressed like of course, you're talking 1950s, early 60s here, right? And she dressed very much like a man, had really short hair, almost like a brush cut. And I remember asking my father, I was probably about 6 or 7 at the time. And I remember asking my father, I said, why does she dress like a man? And my father just said, well, I think people say that she's a lesbian. And I said, well, what's a lesbian? And he said, that's just a woman who likes women. You know, the way that like your mom and I love each other. Well, that's all that is. And there was never any judgment. There was never, he answered my question and he didn't judge them or anything. He just said, okay, that's who that is. And that's, I guess that's the way I was brought up, not to really pass judgment on people. And I do remember people with disabilities, but I never remember them being being outcast or being I don't remember them being treated any differently, I guess is what I'm saying.
What I noticed too in Mi'kmaq communities is the children help out, even in the classroom. You know what I mean? Everyone is a community. So if there are children in the class who have disabilities, it's not viewed as being different. People just kind of are there to help, right? And so we're just about out of time. I see people starting to head out. I'll just do these last two slides, and we're all done. And so we are always growing our Mi'kmaq. It's a lifelong learning journey. And Jane was telling me that on her resume, that's what you have on your resume, right, Jane?
Yeah, at the very top, I have my education. It says teachings from elders, and you know where it says expected date of graduation. I have a lifelong learning, and because to me it is my most important education are the teachings from the elders, because without those teachings from the elders, I have absolutely nothing. The rest of it doesn't matter.
And this is just a quote from Justice Marie Sinclair. The road we travel is equal in importance to the destination we seek. There are no shortcuts. When it comes to truth and reconciliation, we are forced to go the distance. This is just a reminder that we are all treaty people, you know, and it's our shared history. And I appreciate so many people who were able to join us today. You know, like I said before, it's very humbling, and that they're, you know, of our audience in this group. So for me, I like to just say Lalio or Laliek for me and us. And the questions and the vibes, good vibes, and I really enjoyed my time.
And I would like to say, my deepest gratitude and my love to all of you.